Hi everybody, welcome. It's glad to see you all here, and I love Valentine's Day also. So I want to tell you that Milton Access Cable is filming this program, and also I want to thank the Friends of the Milton Public Library for their support of my events. And now I realize you know a lot about this talented speaker, and that we all love his many wonderful books. But let me share with you that Anthony Mitchell Sammarco is a noted historian who has been referred to as the Balzac of Boston history by the Boston Globe.
As the what?
Balzac of Boston history.
What is it called?
He is the author of over 70 books on the development of Boston over the years. When he commenced writing in 1995, he teaches a popular course called Boston History at the Boston University Metropolitan College, and also has taught at the Urban College of Boston since 1997. His courses led him to be named Educator of the Year, and Anthony has received the Bullfinch Award from the Boston State House, as well as several other awards and medals for his work. And also, Mayor Raymond Flynn of Boston named Anthony the Dorchester Town Historian. Now please join me in a warm welcome for him.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here this evening, and I want to thank you all for coming out. It's kind of a cool evening. But this is a new series of books that I've been writing, and Fonthill Press, which is in London, actually approached me to find out what I could write that was different than a city or a town history. So during that period of time, we discussed... maybe I should hold it. How's that? So if I hold it like this, is it better? Okay. So what I was saying is Fonthill Media, which is in London, was a company that approached me to do things other than just city or town histories. They did ask me to do a whole new series on Boston, and my new book on Mattapan will be out in March. But I've also done books on Beacon Hill, Back Bay, Jamaica Plain, East Boston, Kenmore Square and the Fenway, Brighton and Allston, and heaven hope that I will live to do the other 21. But the whole idea was that he said, can you do something on the holidays? So my first book was Christmas Traditions in Boston. And it was basically how Christmas was banned in Boston in the 17th century, but eventually became in the 19th and 20th century a holiday that encompassed everything from the Nativity Creche on the Common, the Enchanted Village of St. Nicholas, and a variety of other things. After that book, it started. There was Valentine's Day traditions in Boston, Halloween traditions in Boston, Easter traditions in Boston, and of course, Thanksgiving traditions. I think in a lot of ways, though, Valentine's Day is something that's not only fun, but as we see on the cover of the book, it's a grouping of two children that are actually kissing. This was a black and white photograph that I bought on eBay, and they actually colorized it, so it actually created this wonderful little aspect. Well, the book itself goes into great detail, and I actually talk about it. That Valentine's Day is a special holiday celebrated on February 14th when people express their love with greeting cards, flowers, and candy. Valentine's Day is the one day of the year that we hopefully anticipate receiving a card from our partner or love interest. It has become an endearing tradition and has long been the day when we realize that we are loved. And although it has become a holiday that seems to embrace the entire world as well as all age groups, it has an interesting historical past from ancient Roman times through to the present. St. Valentine's Day is said to have origins in the ancient Roman festival of Lupercalia, named after the she-wolf, or Lupa, who nursed Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome, which was held in mid-February. The pagan festival, which celebrated the coming of spring, included a rite connected to the purification and health. And at the end of the 5th century, Pope Gallius I replaced the pagan holiday Lupercalia with St. Valentine's Day, and it henceforth was celebrated as a day of romance. Well, in some ways, St. Valentine's Day is named after St. Valentine. And seen here, he was a 3rd century Roman saint, widely celebrated on February 14th, and commonly associated with courtly love. St. Valentine was arrested for continuing to try to convert people to Christianity, and was sent to Rome under the Emperor Claudius Gothicus. The story tells that St. Valentine was imprisoned for marrying Christian couples and aiding Christians persecuted by Claudius in Rome. And a relationship with the saint and emperor began to grow until Valentine attempted to convert Claudius to Christianity. And St. Valentine was beheaded on February 14th of 269 AD. Seen here, St. Valentine has a dove perched on his hand, and they have been associated with love and marriage for thousands of years. And in that instance, St. Valentine has come down to us as not just as we see that Roman Christian martyr, but it's also here. St. Valentine is depicted in an oil painting by Leonhard Beck from 1510, and he's seen in a bishop's mitre, 2 shield-shaped stiffened halves that face the front and back as he blesses an epileptic man at his feet. St. Valentine's feast day was celebrated on February 14th in 496 AD by Pope Gallius I, and the day did not then have a romantic connection. Leonhard Beck was a painter and designer of woodcuts in Augsburg, Germany, and he worked with the father of George Beck on the 2 Psalters for the Augsburg Monastery in 1495. He was an assistant to Han Holbein the Elder, working on a Holbein altarpiece, now in Stadel in Frankfurt am Main. So we realize that not only was he the patron saint of epileptics, but he was also the patron saint of beekeepers. And St. Valentine's Day, as it is known today, was said to have been instituted as a substitute for that pagan Roman holiday at the time called Lupercalia. Now we realize in this instance that many people thought of Lupercalia as something that was a little bit outre. It was a popular feast celebrated in ancient Rome during which a group of pagan priests would sacrifice different types of animals and then run through the streets of Rome slapping young women with the animal hides, a ritual that was thought to guarantee their health and fertility for the ensuing year. Everyone loves Valentine's Day? And today, though Valentine is most closely associated with love and romance, St. Valentine is also the patron saint of beekeepers. And he's seen here holding a bee skeep. He's also the patron saint of epilepsy, fainting, greetings, the plague, travelers, and young people. But we realize in some ways that in 21st century United States, the Cupid is something that actually shoots his bow and arrow, and when it hits one of us, we fall in love instantly. Great life. But the whole idea is that I dedicated this book to this woman because she had the first commercial Valentines that were produced in the United States and were made in the mid-19th century, and she was Esther Allen Howland of Worcester, Massachusetts. She was an entrepreneur during the 19th century, copying English Valentines that had been sent to her father, who kept a store in Worcester. But she was really quite an interesting person, and this is one of her handmade Valentines. Esther Howland was an artist and businesswoman who popularized Valentine's Day greeting cards in America in the mid-19th century. She was born in Worcester, Massachusetts, to Southworth Allen Howland, who operated the largest book and stationery store in Worcester, and her mother was Esther Allen Howland, author of The New England Economical Housekeeper and Family Receipt Book, a regional cookbook that contained recipes, money-saving advice, and medical remedies, and was first published in 1844. After graduating from Mount Holyoke College in 1847, she made the first American commercial Valentines in New England using paper lace and other special materials to make her own, and no two were quite the same. This Valentine's Day card might actually cost 50 cents, which was a tremendous sum of money at the time. But during that period of time, these took on a meaning all of their own. She did them at the dining room table, and it says that this one, which is called Happiness, was a Valentine's Day card that showed Esther Howland's creative side. It was said that Miss Howland took stiff letter paper, scalloped and fringed at the edges, cut heart-shaped holes in the corners, glued colored paper and pictures that came with raisins and tea advertisement boxes and such things, and on this put borders of lace paper that was used on the inside edges of fancy boxes. And she put this around the pictures and hand-painted little verses on them. Here, a heart encircled by lilies of the valley has a mixed bouquet of colorful flowers with lacy embossed surround. And in Victorian time, lily of the valley meant return to happiness. Of course, some of them were really quite beautiful. And here we have little flowers that actually show in this way everything that was hand done. Well, as a graduate of Mount Holyoke College, they've actually collected a series of these that are in their archive. But she was somebody who also hired many women, both spinsters as well as widows that needed to provide for themselves. And seen here, the etching says, making valentines. But Esther Howland soon realized that her handcrafted valentines were labor-intensive. So by the 1860s, she created an assembly line of local women and girls to increase the number of Valentine's Day cards that were produced, with early cards being embossed with a little red H for Howland. She also hired bright young women to copy her designs and work from their homes, further increasing production. And she became well known in the card world because no other producer of commercial valentines understood so well their potential for the tactile communication of complex feelings as did Esther Howland. Well, in that instance, if you were shy to send a Valentine's Day card, she even produced this book called The Sentimental Valentine Writer for ladies and gentlemen. And for those who could not or would not try to compose a personal Valentine's Day wish, Esther Howland published a small 30-page booklet that took the worry out of being too sentimental or overly effusive. In her small pocket-sized book, The Sentimental Valentine Writer for Ladies and Gentlemen, Howland created a veritable cheat sheet that gave tongue-tied lovers appropriate phrases that they could copy with which to woo their love interest. And of course, some of them by the 1860s were really lovely. This woman has actually a hoop skirt, and it's a three-dimensional skirt along with all of this tulle work. And of course, the cartouche on the upper portions almost look like Wedgwood. This was something, as I mentioned, might cost 50 cents to $1. And at that time, that was a tremendous sum of money. And she was making average of $70,000 a year. And that was in the 1870s and 1880s. In that instance, she was very successful. Well, she was successful, but her brother, who was living in Quincy, Massachusetts, was unwell. She sold her business and moved to Quincy and eventually died there. But seen here, the New England Valentine Company was started in 1870 when Esther Howland incorporated her business, which was renowned as much as for its efficiency in assembly line production as for its artistic excellence. And she continued to work from her home until 1879 when she formed a partnership with Edward Taft, the son of Jotham Taft, who was a rival Valentine card maker, and they moved the operation to a factory. And though a great success, the company was sold in 1881 to another card rival producer, George Whitney. And in that instance, Whitney would take this to new heights. George Clarkson Whitney, a Worcester native and Civil War veteran, took over his brother Sumner Whitney's stationery store in the 1870s and renamed it the Whitney Valentine Company. After he purchased it from Lydia Howland, he was making the biggest market of Valentines, upwards of 90% in the United States. And during that period of time, he reduced the expense by doing one-page cards, as we see here, that were die-cut. And of course, they were printed, not hand-done. And in this way, this little boy has placed a Valentine's Day card on a little nail on the door, probably for his young friend to find. With the 4 hearts in the 4 corners, along with the wonderful cutout, these were done for a penny a postcard. And they were very inexpensive and, of course, increased the whole aspect of Valentine's now being sent to the masses. Here it says, "To my Valentine," and a young boy holding newspaper says, "Extra, February 14th," with a red heart. Again, Whitney is creating these of die-cut paper. Even the lace around the edges is simply cut with perforations, and it's simply done by a machine. Well, in that period, the Whitney Company in Worcester, Massachusetts, had over 100 employees. So seen here, the employees of the George C. Whitney Company posed for a photograph in front of the card factory on Union Street in Worcester, Massachusetts. Before 1888, Whitney had bought out at least 10 competitive card manufacturers, most importantly Esther Howland and Edward Taft's New England Valentine Company. He purchased the New York firms of Berlin and Jones, the city's largest manufacturer of valentines, and A.J. Fisher Company, which dealt in vinegar valentines. And it was said that Whitney employs over 200 workmen and workwomen, and it has its own departments for printing, box making, and shipping, besides the designing and manufacture of the artistic features of the various publications by skilled workmen. And the product is sold direct to jobbers in all parts of the Union, with branch offices in Chicago, New York, and Boston. And in this instance, it wasn't just he, but by the turn of the 20th century, we began to see Valentines now being sold in every stationery and card shop around the country. This was actually a fan. It was a paper fan that you would fan yourself, and it says Valentines, wholesale and retail at Treffitt's, which was at 25 School Street in Boston. These were great ephemera or advertising thing, and of course you could fan yourself. But during this period, we began to realize people were now taking Valentine's Day quite seriously. Esther Howland had introduced the aspect of the Valentine to the United States, though they had been known in England since the early 1830s and 40s, and seen here in a photograph of what was basically a shop, possibly in Boston, you were presented with various cards after you had said, "It's for my mother, my wife, or my sister." And in that instance, you might actually purchase one. Well, cards were an important feature, but so too were newspaper articles. And during the 1840s and 50s, Gleason's Pictorial Drawing Room Companion and Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper would do these wonderful etchings that actually talked about Valentine's Day. And this, which is the festival of St. Valentine, which means Cupid's prank and fancies, appeared in the February 18th of 1883 edition of Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper, and with a vignette of a favored fair one and a neglected one in each of the top corners. A delivery boy pulls the knob to ring the doorbell of the woman below, whose valentines are so numerous that they cascade around her. So we realize in that instance that some people received more than we did. Even here, this etching appeared in Harper's Weekly on February 18th of 1865. And within an oval etch depicting St. Valentine's Day, a woman is returned home, put on her bonnet and shawl on the side table, and reads a Valentine's Day message. At the top are pudi, or angels, from whose hands cascade Valentine cards to the masses of people of all ages and origins who read with joy their cards directly below. And even here, the New York Times would actually quip in a sharp criticism of Valentine's Day cards on February 14th of 1856. They said, "Our beaux and belles are satisfied with the few miserable lines neatly written upon fine paper, or else they purchase a printed Valentine with verses ready-made, some of which are costly and many of which are cheap and indecent. In any case, whether decent or indecent, they only please the silly and give the vicious an opportunity to develop their propensities and place them anonymously before the competitively virtuous. The custom with us has no useful feature, and the sooner it is abolished, the better." Well, not everybody agreed, and during this period of time, and this is a print from 1894, people would accost the mailman even before he reached their house. They're on Mount Vernon Street on Beacon Hill in front of the Nichols House Museum. And we realize that these three women are looking into his bag to see what Valentine's Day cards he has for them. But there was a man that actually took the next step, and though Esther Howland had increased not only production of Valentines and did them quite artistically, it would be Louis Prang of Roxbury that took them to new heights. This is an impressive chromolithograph that was printed in 1883 as an advertising display to sell Louis Prang's Valentine's cards, and would probably have been used in a stationery store advertising that Prang cards were on sale there. A woman dressed in a richly patterned colored chiton and long flowing hair holds 6 tethered cherubs who float languidly above her. What is so unusual for this broadside is that the cherubs are multiracial, but all are depicted as chubby and happy. Well, Louis Prang had come to this country as a printer, but he became probably the best-known lithograph producer in the 19th and 20th century. Seen here, Louis Prang is considered the father of the Christmas card, as he published in 1874 the first American Christmas card in Boston, and though they had been known in England since 1842. He was a native of Breslau, Prussia, and he was not only to produce Christmas, Easter, and Valentine's Day and other holiday cards in the United States, but it was said during his successful career that his cards had an individual charm, not merely in design, but in technique, lettering, the stock used, and their almost perfect coloring. His cards were really quite unique. This doesn't look like a very romantic Valentine's Day card. It says, "My Remembrance, St. Valentine's Day." But look at the circle on the upper left. It's a heart with an arrow through it. Well, this was his first Valentine's Day card in 1883, and I'm somewhat disappointed. But during the period of the 1880s and 90s, he did something that was a little bit nicer. And as we see here, it says, "With love to my Valentine." A young girl is encircled by a wreath of multicolored roses in a Louis Prang Valentine's Day card. And it brings to mind Edmund Spenser's epic, The Fairy Queen. The quote is, "She bathed with red roses red and violets blue, and all the sweetest flowers that the forest grew." Well, that's a little bit more of a Valentine's Day card. But he also made very whimsical ones, and this I love. 2 cats looking at each other with a cat on a chimney top, and it says, "Oh, listen to my plaintive muse, nor this my Valentine refuse." And the surprising thing was they went the gamut, right up until his death in the early part of the 20th century. In this way, these were things that one might send to a close friend or even a child, but they were something in some ways that began to make that aspect of Valentine special. But in this book, I also talk about other types of Valentines, and I don't know if anybody has ever heard of these, which were called sailors' Valentines. They're still made on Cape Cod. This sailor's Valentine has Barbados, January of 1847, in tiny red seeds called crab's eyes, in a circular band around a crowned heart set in the bull's eye. This Valentine was probably made at the curiosity shop of Benjamin Hyde's Belgrave in Bridgeton, Barbados, West Indies. Born in England, Belgrave was a dealer in marine specimens and of fancy work that included fish scales, rice shell, green pea, and turtle shell jewelry, as well as curiosities made of diverse specimens of shells and pink and white coral. Later, in partnership with his brother George Gordon Belgrave, the arts and crafts shop employed local Bajan women who fashioned these Valentines for a variety of seashells, as well as other things that went from frames, shells-covered memorial obelisks, to shell-covered boxes. And of course, sailors could purchase them. For many years, this was thought to be something that the sailors would do on their free time on ships. And of course, they were really quite beautiful because they were gifts for one's wife or girlfriend, or sometimes even mothers. And seeing here a Currierized print of 1847 shows the sailor's return. He doesn't have a sailor's Valentine in his hands, but he would actually, in this instance, be the type of thing that he would give. And seen here with this piece, which probably dated to about 1875, is a double-hinged sailor's Valentine. And we see with all sorts of different shells within these octagonal frames, they were beautifully done and have become very collectible today. But during the period of the 20th century, two people, the Cahoons, actually began to make new, more modern sailor's Valentines. Ralph Cahoon on the left-hand side and his wife were well-known artists in Cotuit on Cape Cod. They actually painted with mermaids, mermen, and mer-children. It seemed like every aspect from Cotuit Kettleers, which was a baseball league that would have mermaids with baseball bats and baseball caps, to ascending balloons into the heavens, we realized that these two people would make into these fanciful items, not just paintings, but also sailor's Valentines. Now this one, probably dating from 1960, shows a sailor greeting a mermaid. And of course, she's almost standing on water. But look at the edge. It's still an octagonal frame, but this is much more beautifully done. And you begin to realize in some ways that even these, though they're today now close to 70, 75 years of age, are again very collectible. Well, this is my favorite. And this octagonal sailor's Valentine has a bullseye in the center, and this was painted by Martha Farnham Cahoon, which depicts a mermaid and a triton holding a trident fork as they canoodled in a clamboat-backed gondola on the ocean. These merfolk have been long legendary creatures, which are human from the waist up and fish-like from the waist down, but may also assume normal human shape, especially on long ocean voyages, as well as probably a few drams of rum. Shells and small seeds were glued in artistic designs, using a variety of seashells, tiny shell flowers, and enclosed with octagonal frames made of either cedar or mahogany. But again, these were things that were quite unique, and this sailor's Valentine has a whaling ship in full rig on the ocean, with a faux ivory-carved whale affixed underneath it. One wonders if this was meant to be a poignant reminder of Moby Dick, a sperm whale who was the antagonist in Herman Melville's 1851 novel, Moby Dick, which was based on a real albino whale of that period called Mocha Dick. In this book, Ishmael describes Moby Dick as having two prominent white areas around a peculiar snow-white wrinkled forehead and a high pyramidal white hump, the rest of his body being stripes and patches between white and gray. Whaling ships left from New England ports in early 19th century to hunt the bow-headed whale and the right whale, which were considered the ideal whaling targets, as they were slow, docile, and would float when killed. Well, these were wonderful pieces, and of course they're one of the three interesting features that I feature in the book. Sailor's Valentines are very collectible, but there was also Krampus Valentines. And Krampus is quite an interesting person. He seems to go from holiday to holiday, but there seems to be little doubt as the true identity of Krampus, as in no other form is the full regalia of the horned god of the witches so well preserved. The birch switches, apart from its implied phallic significance, may have a connotation with the initiation rites of certain witch covens, rites which entailed binding and scourging as a form of mock death. The chains are thought to symbolize the binding of the devil by the Christian church. And here, brandishing birch switches, Krampus scales a stone wall with a large Valentine heart behind him. And in Hungarian, he says, "Greetings from the Krampus." Well, wouldn't we love to receive this card on February 14th? Some of his cards even show him bound with chains, and actually in this instance, roasting hearts over an open fire. Look at the back of his shoulder. He has a wooden basket filled with more hearts that he can roast over the open flames. And we also realize here that he takes hearts and actually grates them on a mandolin, so they could only be grated as fine as possible. This was something that was known in the 19th century, and even today are available on eBay and even Amazon, especially sent to your closest friends. But they also made Valentine's vinegar cards. And vinegar cards are really kind of fun. I mean, they're mean, but it says, "To my Valentine," in this enormous lemon. "'Tis a lemon that I hand you and bid you now skidoo. Because I love another, there is no chance for you." It's what's saying it, isn't it? Well, these vinegar Valentines would go the gamut. Not only were they well printed as this one from 1905, but they also had Miss Nosy. And it says, "On account of your talk of others' affairs, at most dances you sit warming the chairs. Because of the care with which you attend to all others' business, you haven't a friend." Can you imagine receiving that in the mail? And of course, there was also the cheapskate. "If you ever spent $1, folks would think you went insane, 'cause the way you squeeze a penny makes Abe Lincoln scream with pain." And one last one, the gossiper. "Every time I see you, you always tell a piper. You no good scandalmonger, your mouth should have a zipper." And these were things that we realized, whether it was a vinegar Valentine, a Krampus Valentine, or even the sailor's Valentine, they're different than the types of Valentines that are portrayed today. But they're really quite fun. And this one, the barfly, just keep right on drinking far more hooch than you're able, and you'll wind up good and stinking underneath some barroom table. Well, each one of them could actually be sent to a variety of people. But by the turn of the 20th century, some of them were really quite fun. This beautiful woman with the Gibson-style hairdo is surrounded by cards in the heart suite. And it says, "To my Valentine, queen of my heart." So we realize in that instance, this piece is something that's really quite charming. But it's a penny postcard. It is not a card. And in that way, this was available for the masses. And they also had this piece, "Love Offerings to my Valentine," beautifully surrounded by periwinkles, and we realized that each, as I said, were simple one-sided pieces that you could simply write a message on the back. Well, during this period of time, in the early part of the 20th century, many artists would outdo one another. And this is a beautiful piece. It says St. Valentine. It's a young Cupid with a quiver in front, and he's actually with his bow and arrow. This was done by a man named Ledersecker. Joseph Crittenden Ledersecker was one of the preeminent American illustrators of the early 20th century and was considered the most in vogue and popular American illustrator of his day. And it was said that in the 1920s were in many ways the apex of Ledersecker's career, with some of his most recognizable work being completed during this time. Ledersecker's work on illustrations for various holidays both reflected and helped mold many of the visual aspects of the era's culture in America. And he was to do hundreds of magazine covers. But this one, which was called Cupid, his wing is the fan of a lady, his foot an invisible thing, and his arrow is tipped with a jewel and shot from a silver string. Well, the Cupid at St. Valentine's Day is beautifully done. This was a cover for a nationwide magazine, and he was somebody that was well respected and amassed a small fortune. But we also began to realize that some of the other people, such as Tasha Tudor, also began to produce Valentine's Day cards. Now, Tasha Tudor actually had a brother by the name of Dr. Frederick Tudor, who lived here in Milton. He lived on Randolph Avenue, and his license plate was number 1 because it was inherited from his uncle and aunt. Tasha Tudor was raised on Beacon Hill. She was the great-granddaughter of Frederick Tudor, who was the Ice King of Boston, who was actually to send ice to both India and South America and amass a fortune. But during the period of the 20th century, she had corgi dogs, and she would write over 100 books that actually talked about the lives of her corgi dogs. And in this instance, with her granddaughter, she's arranging flowers at her home in Vermont. But she would also create what she called the Sparrow Post. Now, this was the most beloved and enduring traditions of Tasha Tudor and her family. Every year, especially near Valentine's Day, Tasha Tudor, her children, and later her grandchildren would spend hours creating miniature letters or valentines, envelopes, and post boxes. Tudor said that the postmaster is Augustus Sparrow, and he had served through these generations and is still none the worse for wear. In this instant, Mr. Sparrow, who is actually a real bird, is a cut wool toy sparrow made by hand, and like many of our favorite characters, he sports a red vest and spectacles, and he is very efficient and has coped successfully with many problems during his lifetime, such as lost mail, delayed deliveries, strikes, migration tangles, and other trying situations. And you can see the children around the sparrow's post, and of course the postmaster's sitting on the ledge as her corgi dogs look. She was really a very well-known artist and wrote a series of these. But there was also a man by the name of Norman Rockwell. Rockwell was a very well-known painter in the mid-20th century. He seemed to encapsulate middle-class America. And seen here looking into a mirror, he's painting his own portrait. But during this period of time, some of his pieces were really quite fun. And this actually says, "Grow old with me, the best is yet to be. The last of life for which the first was made. Our times are in his hand, who saith, a whole I planned. Use shows but half. Trust God, see all, nor be afraid," which was Robert Browning's statement, with this elderly couple courting in a fireplace, with a little cat sitting there as the chaperone. Well, Norman Rockwell would also produce many covers like Ledersecker for the Saturday Evening Post. And here he painted Cupid's Message, which has a young man seated on the ground with a mesmerized expression on his face as Cupid whispers sweet nothings into his ear. He says, "Call Cupid to your aid, my dear, and send me just one little line, to say that whether far or near, you'll always be mine." And they were really quite fun. But we also realized that one of the biggest producers of cards in the 20th century was Hallmark. Do you remember the old adage, when you care to send the very best? Of course, you'd run for the Hallmark card, because you did. But seen here, Joyce Clyde Hall was the founder of Hallmark Cards, and he founded his card company in 1910. So popular were his greeting cards that his staff was increased, and they not only produced a variety of holiday cards, but also everyday greeting cards. In 1928, the company introduced the brand name Hallmark Cards, and it was named after the hallmark symbol used by the goldsmiths in London, in which it was used to refer to the distinguished characteristics of Hallmark cards. Some were really quite wonderful. And here, an employee of 50 years, Mary Brown, would actually sit there and not only create many of these cards, but she created one wonderful series that were called Mary's Bears. And Mary's Bears were actually incredible. She later married, her name became Hamilton, but people loved Mary Brown Hamilton's many cute characters and flowers, but none more than Mary's Bears, Hallmark said. Mary's distinctive work has graced almost every category of both Hallmark and Ambassador products, with characters that idealize the qualities of love, kindness, and affection. And this wonderful little bear holding a string of hearts was really quite fun. But Hallmark would also make others that said, "Remember V-Day" on February 14th so that you could fight heartache over not having remembered your sweetheart with a card, candy, or flowers. Here, a decidedly handsome and muscular Cupid with perfect wings and a quiver of arrows with a leather strap over his shoulder shows his muscled bicep brandishing a tattoo of the trademark, the Hallmark crown. And of course, today, when we think of the school situation, children would actually exchange cards just before their Valentine's Day party. And Hallmark's card said, "When you care to send the very best, the young boy has chosen it and sent it to his school sweetheart." And seen here, she looks at it as he peers from behind a book.
Yeah.
But there were also these cards that would be produced, if anybody remembers, 25 to the box, so there was one for every classmate. And it says here, "She was more fair than words can say. St. Valentine's Day greetings. But look, the red ink has actually spilt. And we realized in that instance this little card could be sent to anyone. But it also had cards for the children that said, I'm going out to sea if you will be my Valentine. Sea meaning S-E-E, but he of course is a sailor who's going to sea, S-E-A. They were fun, and they were wonderful cards that were a little bit unique. But here in a mailbox in a public school, the children actually have placed all of their cards themselves, and much like the Sparrow's Post of Tasha Tudor, each child will receive at least one card, hopefully a very nice one. But when we think of Valentine's Day traditions in Boston, it's a fun and interesting way to recall the holiday, from the exchange of Valentine cards in school to the cards, candy, and flowers we sent or received as adults to our love interest. From ancient Rome with the pagan festival of Lupercalia to the worldwide celebration of the holiday, we revel in its history and evolution through the centuries as a day of love. Today, Esther Allen Howland is honored as the moniker Mother of the American Valentine, with many citing her small card factory as the start of a multi-million-dollar industry. And beginning in 2001, the Greeting Card Association has annually given the Esther Howland Award for Greeting Card Visionary, and they estimate that 200 million Valentines are sent each year in the United States. So in that instance, I dedicated the book to her, and this little quote, which was from her little booklet, says, "Remember me. I would not that my form should rise before thee in thy hours of glee, but when thou thinkest of friends sincere, I wish thee to remember me." In that instance, when I wrote the book on Valentine's Day traditions, I had a lot of fun with this, trying to find out different things about Valentine's Day from ancient times to vinegar Valentines, sailors' Valentines, and even Krampus Valentines. So in that instance, the book, which was published by Fonthill Media in London, beautifully illustrated in color, gives us a little bit of a glimpse as to what is a very well-known holiday, and I wish you a happy Valentine's Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.